Right now, I am honored to have in studio with me Robert Galen Ross. He did work in the Army for the National Security Agency. He did major consulting from Iran to Saudi Arabia for oil companies. He's traveled the world, and he's written quite a few great books that we carry at Infowars.com, the secure online video and bookstore shopping cart. And one of Mr. Ross's most powerful books, very informative book, is The Elite Serial Killers of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK. And so he's going to be with us for the few minutes we've got left in this hour and for the full next hour. And Robert Galen Ross, with all that's happening with the terrorism and the police state here domestically and the war over in the Middle East, both in Iraq and in Lebanon, why should we be concerned now today about the people that killed Lincoln and Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and, of course, President John F. Kennedy?
The reason is, Alex, that nothing of significance happens in the entire world that is not very carefully planned. And sometimes it's planned over many years. And so what is going on today, it probably was planned 25, 30, 40 years ago. And it's happening, and it's just history, and we need to learn from it.
How many years did you study these assassinations before you wrote your book?
I first started in '91 and published this book in '95.
Well, I've read several of your books, and I think it's one of your, if not the best book you've written. Give us an overview of it, and then I want to go into the next hour and then later take some calls on this subject and then what's happening currently, because it all ties together. Tell us about the elite serial killers of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK.
Okay, just hit the high points. John Wilkes Booth did kill Lincoln, but Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill JFK. Sirhan did not kill Bobby Kennedy, and James Earl Ray did not kill Martin Luther King. And so people have asked me, how do you tie Lincoln with JFK? Well, and serial killing. They were both killed by the same family, not the same people. And behind it all were the Rothschilds. And so in my book, I tell all the details of those four killings. Who did it, why they did it, who paid for it.
Explaining this relationship of power, how do the Rockefellers hook into the big Rothschild power axis? We know the Rothschilds, with the fall of Napoleon at Waterloo, had a fast cutter in writers get the message to them. They claimed that the British had lost, and then, of course, everybody sold. They literally bought 7% of the market up, and from then on, they literally owned the British Empire with that power took over. I'm going to talk about how the Rockefellers correspond into that family, into that dynasty, at what level they are, and then go through the Bilderberg Group and a lot more, but specifically talk about the assassinations of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK. Robert Galen Ross is our guest in this hour. Again, he is a military veteran, worked with the National Security Agency, did major consulting for oil companies as far away as Iran and Saudi Arabia, and he is a great author and a friend of mine. He's with us for this full hour. I know we got lines loaded. We're going to get to your calls early in this hour. He's written a book, The Elite Serial Killers of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK, and he's here to talk about that today with us. I do carry this in the online video and bookstore at Infowars.com. And I hope you'll all get it because it's very informative. Those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it, and to understand how the elite at key points in history have killed leaders that weren't going along with their system is important. Of course, I remember with Robert Galen Ross interviewing Madeline Duncan Brown on radio, the mistress of LBJ, who exposed the JFK killing, and now even Barr McClellan, the lawyer for JFK, has gone public about LBJ, bragging about it. Robert Galen Ross, it's amazing to see the truth starting to come out.
Yes, the truth will eventually come out. Sometimes it takes 30, 40 years, but and it really, when Lady Bird finally passes away, and God bless her soul, but when she passes on, they'll come out of the woodwork and start talking about Johnson. They don't dare talk about Johnson while she's still alive.
I remember many years ago, she supposedly got hopping mad when I had you guys on KJFK, separate station here in town. That was not pleasing to them. The Rothschilds, I mean, they were already really powerful, but at the Battle of Waterloo, I talked about it earlier, and this is mainstream history.
Yes.
They had fast riders that got to the channel, then got on cutters, got across really, really fast, and got there hours before, about 5 hours before the news had gotten there, that Lord Wellington actually won the battle, not lost it against Napoleon. And so they announced that England had lost. The stock market plunged. He bought up almost the entire market. It was close to 100%. And they bought up the richest country in the world, and the rest is history. Robert, let's get into who the Rothschilds are from that point on.
Yeah, the Rothschilds, the fellow first to be called Rothschild was born in 1744 on Jew Street in Frankfurt. And his father was in the gold jewelry business and collectibles, and he got his training in one of the local banks, and then went back into business with his father. This time he was selling gold coins and rare coins, and he started dealing with the royalty of Western Europe. And some of his contacts, he would give them a discount or a little kickback. And finally, this led into when the ruler would need money. He said, if you'll send their financial guy to me, I'll loan him the money, and then I'll give you a little side money. And so he started financing all the wars. And from about 1765 on, the Rothschilds have financed both sides of every war in the entire world.
And I'm somewhat of a novice historian. I've read several big books on the Napoleonic Wars, and it's mentioned the Rothschilds were funding them then.
Sure.
And they were, the French Rothschilds were funding one side, and the British Rothschilds funding the other side. I mean, this just gets ridiculous.
And also they financed the reconstruction of the nations destroyed in wars. So they can't do anything but win when there's a war. And
because the country's blown to bits, they're going to come in and totally own it.
Yeah, the first person to be called Rothschild's mother once said, if my sons didn't want wars, there wouldn't be wars.
Oh boy, we'll be right back and get into the Rockefellers and the rest of them and how they like to kill politicians that don't follow their tune, that don't play to their sheet of music. And we will take your calls today on the global government, on the escalation towards World War III. On my prediction, we're going to see a massive staged terror attack in the next 2 months. Robert Galen Ross is our guest. He's an author. He's written the book, The Elite Serial Killers of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK. So they're really rich and powerful coming up to 1800, 1806, Battle of Waterloo. Now they bankrupt the stock market, and again, on news that England had lost, it literally plunges down to nothing. They buy up 90+% of the market. I forget, the number's like 97% or something. It's incredible. This is mainstream British history. And they own everything then. Everybody else is bankrupt. They own everything and of the biggest empire on earth, plus they control what's left of Europe. They financed the Dutch, they financed the Swiss, they financed the French, they financed the Austrians, they got their family everywhere. But they really own England outright, which is pushing to set up its own central bank here at the time. Andrew Jackson, by the 30s, is fighting them trying to set up a central bank. Let's now bring us up to speed to Lincoln. Then we'll just walk through history, if we can, Robert Galen Ross. We're now up to Old Hickory, Andrew Jackson, openly writing letters about the Rothschilds, trying to take over our banking system.
Okay, now, Lincoln needed money to finance the Civil War. And at that time, the only people that had that amount of money were the Rothschilds in London, Paris, Frankfurt, and Switzerland. And they were charging 24 to 36% interest on their money. And so Lincoln thought about it, and so he went to Solomon Chase, the then Secretary of Treasury, and said, let's just print our own money. And so they actually printed $449 million worth of what they called greenbacks. and put them in circulation to pay the federal debt.
That's when the green money started.
That's right, and it was very successful, and so the Rothschilds couldn't stand for any nation, especially a fledgling nation like the United States, to create their own money and credit. And so they actually hired John Wilkes Booth to kill Lincoln. Now, he was part of the Knights of the Golden Circle, which was founded by the Rothschilds to split the United States into two regions, North and South.
And again, if you really study history, it's admitted the British were funding the South. And folks, I'm from the South. I'm not bashing the South. You've got to come to grips with the fact the whole thing was manipulated. Go ahead.
That's right. And so the object was to split the nation into half and have them go to war. And when they had used up most of their ammunition and killed most of the soldiers and gone heavily into debt, then the Rothschilds had the British stations in Canada and Mexico, British Army, and the Spanish and the French Army in Mexico. And the idea was once the United States was very weak, that these troops would come in and retake the United States back under the auspices of the Crown of England, under their control. And so Lincoln saw this coming, and so he contacted the Tsar of Russia and asked for his help, and he sent his fleet to the United States, had a third off of the anchored off New York City, a third in the Gulf of Mexico, and third off California, and notified the British, the French, and the Spanish that if their troops crossed the border, that Russia was going to go to war against them on the side of the North. So they stayed out. And so that's what.
Now, of course, the czars were British/German royalty. In fact, the joke was in photos they were identical because the breeding program was exactly the same. Of course, the Brits later got their cousins back in 1918. Again, a Rothschild-funded war, and every time an oligarch falls in Russia now, it turns out Lord Rothschild really owns Yukos oil, all of it. It's all a big joke. That's come out in the Financial Times, but I'm skipping ahead. Why did the czars then want to help the U.S.?
They just, I don't know the exact reason, but they sympathized with Lincoln, took his side, because they thought it was an unfair war. And, but that actually led to the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, the Bolshevik Revolution was headed up by mostly Khazarian Jews from the Lower East Side of New York City that were taken into Russia in seal box cars. Once they got deep inside Russia, they were released and spread out over the nation and fomented the Bolshevik Revolution. And some like over 95% of the heads of the Bolshevik Revolution were Jews from New York City.
Well, I knew that had been reported on, and that the Rothschilds did do that. And then you also had the famous Lenin's train car with $25 million in gold. Going in right when they were about to lose to the White Russians in 1917.
Yes, and so the reason that the Rothschilds caused the Bolshevik Revolution was to get even with the Tsar of Russia for taking the side of Lincoln.
Well, I think it's pretty clear why the Tsars were their own elite at that time, and they saw how England was going and picking everybody off. So a way to stop them from doing that was to go basically support the United States and trying to keep that together. Now, fast forwarding, they kill Lincoln. What happens?
Okay, Lincoln was killed by John Wilkes Booth, and at the time he had $8,000 on him, but he was an unemployed actor. And so that really explains that he got his down payment from the Rothschilds after he was able to escape from the back door of this tobacco barn. The American soldiers followed Booth to this tobacco farm, and they thought there was only two guys in there, and said, "If you don't come out, we're gonna shoot." And so Booth slipped out the back door and went to the coast and got on a ship and sailed to London or to England and went to London and got his final payment from the Rothschilds. From there, he sailed to Bombay, India, and died 14 years later of natural causes. And the person that is buried in John Wilkes Booth's tomb had very red hair, and John Wilkes Booth really had raven black hair, and so Booth's granddaughter interviewed a number of people that were witnesses, and so she wrote a book about it. It's a very long book, and she also had documents that Booth had written from Bombay to friends in the United States.
Sure, I mean, it's on record that he also lived in London for a while. Let's fast forward now to the Rockefellers. How do they come on the scene in the U.S.?
Well, the Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller, the first guy, was an agent of the Rothschilds, and so David Rockefeller is also an agent. And that's John D. got his financing for the oil business from the Rothschilds, and so they've had a very close relationship ever since.
I went to the Bilderberg Group meeting just a month and a half ago in Ottawa, Canada, and there was Queen Beatrix, there were the Rothschild representatives, there were the David Rockefeller was there, Henry Kissinger, all these people, and we've gotten a lot of the documents out of there in the past. They're the ones setting up the EU, the American Union, all of this. What type of stuff goes on inside those Bilderberg Group meetings from your research?
Well, Alex, I actually have documents, the minutes of several of their meetings, and a very dear friend of mine in Frankfurt went into the archives and got a hold of these documents and sent me copies of them. And so I have the minutes of the first Bilderberg meeting held in Oosterbeek, the Netherlands.
And that was in 54?
In 54. And David Rockefeller was there, and he spoke about the economics of the world at that time and talked about the grand plan to create the New World Order.
Now, he's 2 years ago put out a biography, and he says in it that, yes, they're going to get rid of the U.S., and he is against the United States, and he is for one world government. In fact, his quote's worse than that. I ought to go pull it up.
Well, David Rockefeller is the only person to attend every Bilderberg conference since it was founded. Henry Kissinger is the next most attended person. But
the founder was Prince Bernhard. He was a big Nazi. Now his daughter is Queen Beatrix, owner of Dutch Royal Shell. By the way, their finances are officially state secrets of the Netherlands.
Right. And by the way, this is a sad issue, but Shell Oil Company was required to relook at their proven reserves of oil, and they downgraded their proven reserves 5 times in 1 year to meet the Securities Exchange Commission requirements. So that means that our peak oil is probably all past, but that's a different subject. We were talking about the assassinations.
Well, by peak oil, you mean well, we know that it was Dutch Royal Shell that 10 years ago, according to Greg Pallas, BBC, created the myth of the peak oil because they're trying to create artificial scarcity.
Well, there's 2 sides of that coin, and I'm not sure we'll ever know the real truth about it. There's good arguments on both sides.
But we know that they're manipulating.
Well, all companies have always lied. There's one fellow.
Oh, I know. I've talked to people that deal with them. I've got family that deals with them. They're a bunch of crooked snakes.
That's right. But let's get back to the assassinations. Lincoln was killed because he created money. Now, if you fast forward to June 4th, 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy signed Executive Order 11110, instructing the Treasury Department to print $4.5 billion worth of silver certificates in direct competition with the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve notes. So Lincoln and JFK were killed for exactly the same reason. The Rothschild don't want anybody competing with them in the money area.
Well, in fact, Lincoln reissued the original, Kennedy issued the original Lincoln greenbacks.
Yeah, the silver certificates you could redeem at any bank, federal bank, in hard silver.
Yeah, but in fact, right before he died, you can go to coin shops and buy these. They're $5 bills. They don't say Federal Reserve. They've got a red stamp on them, United States note. And he reissued the Lincoln greenbacks. We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, to continue with the elite serial killers. We're going to get into that section now. Robert, let's run through it. Okay, so they kill Kennedy. Now, what do they do next?
Well, I think it's interesting to go into the details on Kennedy.
Sure.
There was a secret meeting the night before Kennedy was killed at Clint Murchison's house off Preston Avenue in North Dallas. And the reason I know about it because my dear friend Madeline Duncan Brown was also in attendance socially. And there were about 50 people at this social event, and about 25 members of the press. And Johnson arrived about 11:15 or 11:30 that night. And as he walked in the door, Clint Murchison stood up and said, "Okay, men, we can have our meeting now." And so 25 men went into the conference room and closed the door. And it just so happened that I've interviewed 2 of the people that were in that secret meeting, and I've interviewed 5 people that were socially there.
And now LBJ's lawyer, his lawyer for 20 plus years, has gone public about LBJ bragging about killing Kennedy. Please continue.
Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, secret meeting, was to discuss the cover-up of the killing that's going to take place the next day. And so it's important to know who's in attendance in this secret meeting. It was Clint Murchison was there. It's his house. H.L. Hunt was there, Lyndon Baines Johnson, George Brown, the owner of Brown and Root, a fellow named John J. McCloy, and that's very important to get that name because at that time he was chairman of the Chase Manhattan Bank and chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations and agent of the Rothschilds. That's how I tie the Rothschilds into this killing. Also, Richard Nixon was there, J. Edgar Hoover and his running mate Clyde Tolson, his boyfriend, and then there's the former mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabell, Amon G. Carter, R.L. Thornton was also a former mayor of Dallas. John Connally was there, and he knew that there's going to be a killing the next day, so you know that his pucker string was really tight the next day when he was sitting in front of Kennedy. He knew that it's going to be shot. In fact, there were witnesses that were standing right beside the limousine when the first shots were fired, and they heard Connally say, "My God, they're going to kill us all." Now, Lee Harvey Oswald is not a they. He said they are going to kill us all.
Yeah, that's on record, and you can see him on film footage as he's on the route the whole time. He's got his lips back over his teeth. He's clenched. He's totally nervous.
Yes.
Because he knows he's in a car going, "I hope these guys shoot straight."
That's right. And actually, there were, let me name just a couple more guys.
Again, Connally was the governor.
Yeah, John Connally was governor of Texas at that time, and also Malcolm E. Mac Wallace was there. Now, he was one of the, he was at the secret meeting, but he's also one of the shooters the next day, and I'll discuss that. And Cliff Carter was in the secret meeting. He was the executive director and treasurer of the Democratic National Committee. And there were 3 representatives from Mafia there. Carlos Marcello, boss of the New Orleans Mafia, Joe Savello, head of Dallas Mafia, and Jack Ruby was in the secret.
And let's just be clear, all the other people are just WASP mob, so you've got the Italian and Jewish mob there too.
That's right. And in addition to that, there was a fellow named Larry Campbell. He represented Jimmy Hoffa at this meeting. Jimmy Hoffa couldn't attend this meeting, so he sent Larry Campbell to represent him. And the sheriff of Dallas County, Bill Decker, was in this secret meeting. Clint Peoples was U.S. Marshal, later became a top Texas Ranger. So you have members of law enforcement, FBI, Mafia, the oil executives, banking, all there to discuss this killing.
And they're all there because they've already done 1,000 corrupt things before that to be at this meeting. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Robert, Galen, Ross, and I, your calls are coming up. We're going to get to you. Jeffrey, Don, Mike, Mark, James, and others. Stay with us. We were talking during the break, Galen and I, about the debt. The Dallas Morning News said $44 trillion about 3 years ago. They had a big headline with some chief economists, private economists looking at it and saying the real obligations are this. Now I've read in the same publications that just in 3 years, once it starts compounding, it grows this fast, that the real obligation since Bush has accelerated everything, spending more money than all presidents before him, that it's really over $90 trillion. But you were just saying that you heard the Treasury say the old number again? Or
Yeah, the head of the Treasury Department said that they keep two sets of books. The real debt is 49 trillion, and that was about a month ago.
I wonder why we're getting different numbers. Well, regardless, it's a lot more than the 9 trillion we're hearing that we have right now. But I mean, obviously, can you explain to people? And I want to get back into assassinations. How these bankers set up economic systems that are designed to quote fail? They're black holes meant to get us into debt.
Yeah, the best example of that is the crash of '29, where the Federal Reserve loaned money to anybody for any reason up until early part of '29.
It's like credit cards now.
That's right, and then all of a sudden they called in all loans. They stopped the printing of money, and the M3 money supply did about a 6% fall immediately.
How many people know the government can call in or the corporations can call in their mortgages all right now?
That's right. And so people committed suicide. They couldn't borrow money to pay off their loans, and then they went into deep recession, and because the banks wanted to buy up all the state banks weren't required to belong to the Federal Reserve System, and so they wanted to bankrupt the state banks or make them become members of the Federal Reserve.
And boy, after that, they did it.
And so and then they bought up industry and just land and everything.
This is an important subject. We've got to have you on for another hour sometime via telephone or in studio just to cover that. But Robert Galen Ross, let's jump back into the assassination of JFK and then give us a short version on MLK and on Bobby.
Well, the Warren Commission says that there's one lone shooter that fired 3 shots from the 6th floor. His name was Lee Harvey Oswald.
And I'm a Chinese jet pilot.
Right. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was on the 6th floor at that time, but he didn't have a gun in his hand that day. But he was under CIA mind control. And just as soon as the shots were fired, he ran down the stairs to the 2nd floor to the employee lounge and was standing there drinking Coke.
And by the way, it's admitted that he was seeing psychiatrists. He was mentally ill. He'd been in the weird Marine Corps high-level security programs, then been allowed to go to Russia, allowed to, quote, defect back. I mean, out there was staging, anti-Cuba, pro-Cuba rallies. I mean, if anybody was a spook, it was Lee Harvey McVeigh Oswald.
But instead of being one shooter, there are actually 6 shooters and 5 radio operators.
And you've been able to get their names. Tell us about those.
All right. The command post for this killing was on the 2nd floor of the Texas School Book Depository Building, and on the 2nd floor was a fellow named Cliff Carter, who was at the Clint Murchison meeting the night before, and then Carlos Marcello was there. It was Jack Ruby and George Reese were on the 2nd floor, and 2 or 3 others. Sam Giancana was also on the 2nd floor that day, and at each of the 4 shooting locations there was a radio operator. Behind the picket fence there were 2 shooters and 1 radio operator, and I named those. On the 6th floor there was 1 radio operator, is a Hispanic lady named Ruth Ann. I don't know her last name for sure, but she had driven to Oklahoma the week before to pick up the shooter, Loy Factor, who was also on the 6th floor. And so Loy Factor was on the 6th floor. Malcolm E. McWallace was on the 6th floor.
Give us some of the backgrounds of these shooters. How did Charles Harrelson, in federal prison right now for shooting judges, where was he in all this?
I think he was one of the guys on the boxcar, the so-called tramps that they picked up.
Yeah, we know the Dallas Times-Herald took a photo of him being picked up by the police.
Right.
Here are these hobos in brand new clothes, and
But anyway, so there were 2 shooters and 1 radio operator on the 6th floor of the depository building. On the 2nd floor of the Dowtex building, there was 1 shooter and 1 radio operator, and on top of the Dallas County Records Building, there's 1 shooter and 1 radio operator. Behind the picket fence was Jack Grimm. He was operating the radio, and John Ernst and Clyde Faust were the 2 shooters. So then we, as I said, Lee Harvey Oswald was on the 6th floor, but was not among the shooters. So when Cliff Carter, he said earlier he was on the command post on the 2nd floor. When he says shoot, all 6 shooters fired their shot. Immediately, they didn't eject the cartridge. They just immediately hid the rifle and casually walked away while everybody was screaming and running in all directions. And so they just went into the crowd without being noticed.
Do you want to get more into why they killed Kennedy, or do you want to skip ahead to Bobby and MLK?
Well, the main reason that they killed Kennedy was because he created money, the silver certificates. There were several other reasons. He had fired all of the heads of the CIA because of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. The mafia, they supplied, or the CIA supplied the rifles for that shooting that day. There were also mafia members downstream from the motorcade in case they missed him at Dealey Plaza. So there are a lot of shooters in Dallas that day, but in my book I named the ones that...
And it's admitted the CIA and other intelligence agencies, wherever they are, contract with mafia hitmen. They like the separation, and some of the better hitmen are mafia because they get a lot of practice.
That's right, and so in the night before the Kennedy killing, we already know that we had J. Edgar Hoover and his buddy meeting with the mafia. And they did that regularly. So, and there are a number of times in Senate and House meetings where they would ask Hoover about the mafia, and he many times said that they don't exist.
Well, he called it a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, but
the mafia doesn't exist.
Right. So, but there he is meeting with them.
And that's, of course, because they had all the photos of him and his boyfriend.
That's right.
Okay, let's, because I want to take a few calls here. Let's
Sure.
skip ahead now to why did they want to kill Martin Luther King and Bobby?
Well, they wanted to kill Bobby because he knew a lot of the details of what was behind his brother's killing, but see, he was powerless because J. Edgar Hoover was head of the FBI, and all investigations started at the FBI, and all evidence went to the FBI. So in order for him to hold a real investigation, he had to become president and then fire J. Edgar Hoover and then have a real investigation of the murder. But that's the reason they took him out. But
what really happened with Sirhan?
Well, Sirhan was there. I don't know whether you've seen the Manchurian Candidate movie, but he was the Manchurian Candidate, the classic case of it. Before the shooting took place, he was seen drinking coffee with a lady in a polka dot dress. Her job was there to put rohypnol or some other amnesia drug into Sirhan's coffee, because today he cannot remember about an hour and a half of his life at the time of the shooting. And Bobby was there having a political meeting in the Ambassador Hotel, and his next meeting was going to a fundraiser, and the quickest way to get there was through the pantry of the hotel. And there was about 50 people in this pantry, and the maitre d' of the hotel was leading Bobby through this pantry, and when they got the steam tables, the maitre d' felt someone trying to get around to the right side of him, and he thought they was trying to shake Bobby's hand, but all of a sudden Sirhan pulled out an 8-shot 22 caliber pistol and started shooting. He fired all 8 shots before Roosevelt Greer was able to get the gun out of his hand and wrestle him to the ground. Now, all these witnesses that were in there in the pantry, none of them said that Sirhan got any closer than 3 feet from Bobby and was always in front of him. And in my book, I include a copy of Thomas Noguchi's coroner's report, and all shots came from down below and from behind Bobby.
And there were also huge powder blasts all over his back.
That's right. The first shot broke the padding in his jacket and on the right shoulder, but didn't break the skin. The next shot was under his armpit and came out his throat. The next shot was in the middle of in his back, about 4 inches from the shoulder. And the last shot was behind his right ear. The bullet was an inch from his ear, behind his ear, and the muzzle of the gun was an inch from his head. So Sirhan could not have fired that shot, or any of those shots. But that's clearly in the coroner's report, and they tried to discredit the coroner's report and tried to get him fired, but they're not successful because he's a very accurate coroner.
Well, it's the same thing with the ridiculous magic bullet with JFK. I mean, you shoot a bullet into water, it deforms. You have this undeformed bullet that's been pulled out of the end of an unfired casing, thrown on a stretcher. This thing supposedly hit 3 or 4 bones and shot through 2 people in a seat. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, that was all Inspector's magic bullet theory. The bullet went through Kennedy and then took a right-hand turn and went down and went through Conley a couple of places and through the seat and then lay on the floor pristine like it had never been fired. But we have the same people involved in the killing of JFK, RFK, and MLK, including J. Edgar Hoover.
Why they want to get MLK?
He was speaking out against the Vietnam War, and he was speaking up for the civil rights for the black people. And Johnson figured that if he didn't get rid of King, that it might lose the next election. And
I've really researched that story. That it's the same thing. That's totally ridiculous what happened there. I mean, the official story is an even bigger joke.
Yeah, in the case of King, James Earl Ray. In fact, I was the last person to interview him in Nashville prison before he died of cancer of the liver. And we had about an hour's talk about it, and then I spent about 3 hours talking to his brother Jerry about it. But he said he was a patsy, and that his attorney had, his name was Percy Foreman out of Houston, and the attorney told him that if he didn't confess to the killing, that he would probably be executed. And also his father was an escaped convict from Oregon, and the police knew where he was, but they didn't want to mess with him because he was just a low-level criminal. And they said they would pick him up and put him in solitary confinement the rest of his life. And there was a fellow named Raoul that was there that had James Earl Ray come to Memphis, supposedly on a gun deal. And so his attorney, Percy Foreman, told James that they were going to brand his brother Jerry as being our Raoul and put Jerry in prison in solitary confinement the rest of his life, and then that they would kill James Earl if he didn't confess. But Percy told him, says, now, if you will confess, within 2 weeks I will demand a retrial and we'll clear all this up. Well, he confessed. There was never a demand. Percy left town and never entered the picture again. So it was all a deliberate act to convict a patsy.
Well, Operation Northwoods, I always go back to Operation Northwoods, but here's this 15-page U.S. government document talking about hijacking jets, bombing buildings, doing all this to blame it on these foreign enemies to start a war. But in it describes how to frame patsies.
That's right.
It even says we'll go shoot cops, or we'll go shoot people, and then we'll even grab patsies and blame it on them.
That's right. And when you get in the inner circle of our government, you have some very evil people that, whether this Operation Northwood you're talking about was created by L.L. Limster, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff,
yeah,
head of the military, plotting against to try to give a false excuse to invade Cuba.
And now we've got the same type of crowd in control, but they launched it.
That's right. So it just goes on and on. But
well, let's try to jam a few calls in here. Folks, if you want the book, we've got it. It's available at Infowars.com. It's the elite serial killers of Lincoln, JFK, RFK, and MLK. Thanks for holding. I know that folks will be all over the map, but that's okay. Jeffrey in Kentucky, you're on the air. Go ahead.
I was an 8-year veteran in the Army, and I'm a wounded soldier from Iraq. And I just recently ran into your program on the internet, and I saw Terror Storm, and then just, I mean, I've dealt with explosives and stuff like that, and actually seen the in-depth stuff on your program, and it just kind of hit me in the face. And since I've been back, I've been told many things, you know, since I've protested the war here in Kentucky, and that I'm not Christian, I'm not a patriot, you know, stuff like that. And I've gotten really involved, not only in religious aspects of things, but also in certain things like this since I've seen your program. And do you think, like, the dominants, like the Christian Reconstructions and the Christian Zionists and the right-wingers like Jerry Falwell and James Dobson have at least their finger in something like this?
Oh, well, I mean, they're on the payroll to pacify. And again, Christianity is now worshiping Bush's lies, worshiping big government, worshiping the destruction of our country. I know, I've been told, and it's told in churches, he goes, you don't support this warrior of the devil. Well, that's not our religion. Our religion isn't worshiping a lying, corrupt government. I mean, you need to give them a copy of my new film, Order of Death, and say, you know, Bohemian Grove, Skull and Bones, yeah, that's real Christian. Robert Galen Ross, you want to comment on this?
Yeah, President Bush says he's a Christian. Now, does a Christian go out and kill thousands of people and bankrupt a nation? That makes me wonder if it really is.
Well, we know about Skull and Bones and Bohemian Grove.
Sure.
I mean, I heard they were doing a ritual. I snuck in there, and sure enough, and they go to it.
I mean, stuff too, but the fact of the matter is, when I was over in Iraq, I saw the Muslim extremists versus the Christian fundamentalists, and the Christian Zionists got their finger in Israel, buying up land and putting Jews there just to hopefully have end days prophecy happen. And that's one reason why I got out of the army. I'm like,
I know, it's just total craziness. You know, do me a favor, call me back on Monday. I want to talk to you more when we got more time. Good, thanks for holding. Call me back on Monday. We're in the final segment. Before we run out of time, I want to thank Robert Galen Ross for joining us again in studio, my friend.
My pleasure.
You bet. It's always good to have you here with us. I know we have loaded lines, and I'm sorry. We'll try to get to a few of you here in just a moment. You were going to finish up one more story about the murder of MLK?
Yeah. I said earlier that the same people were behind the killing of JFK, RFK, and MLK. Well, H.L. Hunt was at all involved in it. In fact, I have copies of 4 checks that he wrote to pay off the killers of Martin Luther King. And I got these from Madeline Duncan Brown, who got copies of them from the guy that owns the actual canceled checks. And for a total amount of $450,000, which is a lot of money at that time.
It's about $4 million adjusted, I would guess, from memory with today's numbers.